In the dim glow of a single desk lamp, hidden away in the dusty archives of a forgotten county courthouse in rural Georgia, a young archivist named Elena Ramirez stumbled upon a leather-bound ledger that would unravel a century-old nightmare. It was 2023, and the air hung heavy with the scent of mildew and regret. As her fingers traced the faded ink, she uncovered entries not of crops or debts, but of human lives catalogued like livestock, names, ages, pairings dictated by whim and science. One line chilled her to the core. Subject 14, paired for vigor. Outcome, viable but marked. What began as a routine digitization project had unearthed the blueprint of a doctor's twisted experiment, a program so audacious in its cruelty that it masqueraded as progress, buried under layers of official silence. Before we proceed, subscribe and hit the bell. Here we unearth secrets buried by official history and give voice to what was silenced. The story begins not in those archives, but over a century earlier, in the sweltering heat of a sprawling cotton plantation nestled in the heart of antebellum Georgia. It was the 1840s, a time when the South's economy thrived on the backs of the enslaved, their labor the invisible engine of wealth for men like Dr. Elias Hawthorne. Hawthorne wasn't your typical plantation owner. He was a man of letters and lancets, a Harvard-educated physician who had returned to his family's estate with visions of eugenics before the word even existed. Tall and gaunt, with eyes like polished obsidian, he viewed the plantation not merely as a source of profit, but as a living laboratory. His wife, Lydia, a fragile beauty from a fading Charleston lineage, managed the big house with a quiet complicity, her smiles masking the shadows that lengthened each evening. The Hawthorne plantation, known locally as Blackthorn Fields, stretched across thousands of acres, its white-columned mansion a beacon of southern gentility amid fields that bled white under the relentless sun. Enslaved families toiled from dawn's first light, their hands raw from bowls that seemed to multiply endlessly. But beneath the rhythm of hoes and songs sung in hushed defiance, something darker stirred. Whispers among the quarters spoke of the pairings, selections made not by tradition or affection, but by Hawthorne's cold calculations. He believed bloodlines could be refined like fine wine, weeding out weakness to produce stronger workers, faster, more enduring, unyielding to the lash or the fever. It was a program of forced unions, veiled as benevolence, where men and women were matched like puzzle pieces in his quest for what he called vital stock. Elias Hawthorne's obsession took root in the wake of a personal tragedy. His first child, a son born frail and lost to illness mere months after birth, had shattered him. In the quiet of his study, surrounded by medical tomes imported from Europe, he pored over theories of heredity, convinced that the inferior strains among the enslaved were to blame for such frailties seeping into his own line. He began documenting everything: sketches of physiques, notes on temperaments, even crude measurements of endurance under labor. The ledger Elena would find decades later was his magnum opus, a database of sorts, tracking pairings and their yields. Children born into bondage, their traits recorded with clinical detachment. Stupid notion, he once confided to a visiting colleague, dismissing critics who called it folly, but science demands trial. The first signs of the program's grip on Blackthorn came subtly, like cracks in parched earth. In the spring of 1845, a young woman named Mira, strong-shouldered from years in the fields, was pulled from her routine and paired with Josiah, a blacksmith whose arms bore the scars of earlier resistances. They had known each other since childhood, shared stolen glances amid the overseer's watchful eye, but this union was no choice of theirs. Hawthorne oversaw it personally, his voice a low murmur of instructions in the dim light of a barn, as if scripting a medical procedure. Mira's eyes, wide with unspoken dread, met Josiah's only once, a silent plea amid the forced intimacy. Months later, their child arrived, a boy with Mira's resilience, but Josiah's quiet fire. Hawthorne noted it triumphantly. Pairing successful, line strengthened, yet the human cost rippled outward, invisible to the ledgers, but etched in the souls of those bound to the land. Families were fractured without mercy, a mother separated from her daughters, reassigned to balance the stock. The quarters, those clusters of weathered cabins where stories were woven into the night, grew heavier with unspoken grief. Songs of longing turned to laments, coded in spirituals that outsiders dismissed as mere melody. Lydia Hawthorne, ever the dutiful wife, turned a blind eye, her days filled with embroidery and teas that masked the cries echoing from the fields. She knew of her husband's work, had even suggested refinements drawn from her own readings on lineage. In her diary, hidden in the attic's shadows, she wrote of it as a necessary evolution, her words a fragile shield against the moral abyss. As the years wore on, the program expanded, Hawthorne's ambitions outpacing the plantation's bounds. He corresponded with like-minded elites, planters in Louisiana and Virginia, who traded notes on improvement strategies. Rumors trickled into nearby towns. Blackthorn's fields yielded more than cotton. They produced enigmas, children who seemed both blessed and cursed by their engineered origins. But official records, spotless. Tax ledgers listed only acreage and yields, births and deaths sanitized into numbers. The local sheriff, a Hawthorne cousin, ensured inquiries died quietly, bribes and threats weaving a web of complicity. Disappearances were chalked up to runaways or fevers, bodies vanishing into unmarked graves or the depths of forgotten wells. Elena's discovery in 2023 cracked that facade wide open. As she pored over the ledger's yellowed pages, cross-referencing with faded census rolls, patterns emerged. Dozens of lives intertwined in Hawthorne's web, descendants scattered across generations. One entry haunted her, a note on failures, pairings that ended in tragedy, mothers lost to complications that smelled of coercion. It wasn't just a doctor's folly, it was a systematic erasure, a blueprint for control that echoed the broader sins of the era. The plantation had long since fallen to ruin, its mansion a vine-choked relic, but the soil still whispered of those buried secrets. In the quiet of that archive, Elena felt the weight of it all, the persistence of memory against the tide of forgetting. How many families carried these invisible chains? Unaware of their origins in Blackthorne's shadowed fields, the ledger was more than paper. It was a database of suffering, the first of its kind, born from a stupid dream of perfection that twisted humanity into data points. As she closed the book, the air seemed to thicken, carrying echoes of Mira's plea, Josiah's fire, and the countless others who endured in silence. The truth, long interred, was rising, and with it, the demand for reckoning. The summer of 1846 draped Blackthorne fields in a haze of unrelenting heat, the kind that pressed down on the land like a judgment unspoken. Cotton bolls swelled under the sun, promising another bountiful harvest. But for those chained to the soil, the air carried a different weight, one laced with anticipation and dread. Dr. Elias Hawthorne, his face etched deeper by the lines of fervent study, had refined his methods over the past year. What began as tentative pairings had evolved into a meticulous regimen, his ledger swelling with entries that blurred the line between science and sin. He moved through the quarters at dusk, a spectral figure in his linen suit, clipboard in hand, selecting subjects with the precision of a surgeon dissecting a specimen. "Vitality must be cultivated," he murmured to himself, convinced that his interventions would not only fortify the plantation's workforce, but safeguard his own lineage from the frailties that had claimed his son. Mira and Josiah's union had been the prototype, a success in Hawthorne's eyes that emboldened him to scale his ambitions. Their boy, named Elias after the doctor in a twist of ironic homage, grew sturdy amid the rows of white blooms, his small hands already gripping a hoe with unnatural steadiness. Mira watched him from afar, her heart a tangle of fierce protectiveness and quiet terror. She had borne the child in the dim confines of a healer's cabin, the midwife's whispers urging her to push through the pain that Hawthorne dismissed as expected variability. Now, as she labored in the fields, her thoughts turned inward, weaving memories of stolen moments with Josiah into a fragile armor against the overseer's crackling whip. Josiah, for his part, hammered iron in the forge with renewed fury, each strike echoing the rage he dared not voice. Their glances across the yard spoke volumes. Love forged in chains, now tainted by the doctor's design. But Hawthorne's program demanded more than isolated trials. He sought patterns, a database of traits that could predict outcomes and eliminate what he termed degenerative elements. In the fall of that year, he initiated a series of assemblies in the great barn, its rafters heavy with the scent of hay and sweat. Enslaved men and women, summoned under threat of separation, stood in lines like auction lots, their bodies appraised for height, build, and resilience. A woman named Etta, whose voice had once lifted the quarters with songs of distant rivers, was matched with a newcomer from the Carolinas, a man called Reuben, whose eyes held the storm of uprooted lives. Their pairing was swift, decreed in Hawthorne's study with Lydia present, her needle pausing over a sampler as she nodded approval. "Think of the legacy," she said softly, her voice a veil over the unease that flickered in her gaze. Etta's resistance was subtle, a refusal to meet Reuben's eyes during the mandated encounter, her body rigid with the knowledge that this was no union, but a transaction etched in flesh. The human toll mounted like shadows, lengthening at twilight. Families, already fractured by the auction block's caprice, splintered further under Hawthorne's directives. A father, Harlan, watched helplessly as his daughters, twins of 12 summers, were reassigned to lighter duties in the big house, their futures bartered for purity of line. Harlan's nights dissolved into vigils by the fire, his whispers to fellow laborers planting seeds of murmurings that the overseers strained to uproot. "This ain't God's way," he confided to Josiah one moonless evening, the forge's embers casting their faces in ruddy light. Josiah nodded, his blacksmith's hands clenching. Yet resistance was a perilous bloom in such soil. A man who questioned a pairing too loudly vanished into the swamps, his absence logged as a fever's victim. The quarters fell into a heavier silence, broken only by the muffled sobs of those enduring the program's unyielding grip. Lydia Hawthorne, from her perch in the mansion's parlor, observed it all through lace-curtained windows. Her role was one of quiet architecture, suggesting pairings that aligned with her own notions of refinement, favoring those with gentle dispositions to temper the wild strains. In the privacy of her diary, pages yellowing in the attic's gloom, she justified it as stewardship, a means to elevate the estate beyond mere commerce. But cracks appeared in her facade. Sleepless nights brought dreams of her lost son, his frail cries merging with imagined pleas from the fields. She confided in no one, not even Elias, whose detachment grew as his ledgers filled. Their marriage, once a union of shared ambitions, strained under the weight of complicity, her smiles at supper tables masking a growing hollow within. Beyond Blackthorn's borders, the program's whispers began to stir unease. A circuit-riding preacher, passing through the county seat, heard tales from freedmen in town, rumors of unnatural breedings that twisted the soul. He jotted notes in a sermon book, intending to preach fire and brimstone. But a visit from the sheriff quelled his zeal. Hawthorne's influence extended like roots through the soil of power. Local magistrates, indebted to the family's loans, buried inquiries in stacks of unfiled petitions. Official records remained pristine, births noted as routine, deaths attributed to the era's relentless plagues. Yet in hidden corners, memory persisted. An old woman in the quarters, Granny Ruth, passed down oral fragments to the young ones, stories of ancestors who dreamed of freedom's shore, their spirits unbroken despite the doctor's meddling. "He thinks he writes our blood," she would say, her voice a thread in the night, "but the river runs deeper than his ink." By winter's chill in 1847, Hawthorne's database had catalogued over 24 pairings, each entry a cold chronicle of outcomes, children born into the program's shadow, their traits dissected for future matches. One failure gnawed at him, a union that yielded a child with what he called hereditary debility. Swiftly isolated and reassigned to menial tasks, the mother's grief, a quiet unraveling, went unrecorded, her pleas dissolving into the wind. Elias dismissed it as a stupid oversight in selection, refining his criteria with imported charts from Philadelphia quacks. The plantation thrived outwardly, its yields swelling, but the undercurrent of sorrow deepened, families bearing invisible scars that time would etch into generations. Elena's hands trembled in the archive as she traced these threads, the ledger's script revealing the program's inexorable spread. Cross-references to church baptismal rolls showed clusters of births tied to Blackthorn, descendants whose lives echoed the engineered fates. A faded photograph, tucked between pages, captured a group of children in the fields, faces that mirrored Mira's resilience, Josiah's fire, unwitting inheritors of Hawthorne's folly. The doctor's stupid vision had birthed not progress, but a hidden archive of suffering where genetic whispers survived the silence imposed by power. As snow dusted the courthouse windows in 2023, Eleanor wondered how many echoes still lingered in the blood of the living, demanding to be heard. The truth, once confined to yellowed pages, clawed its way toward light, one revelation at a time. The frost of early 1848 clung to Blackthorn Fields like a shroud, muting the crunch of boots on frozen earth as Dr. Elias Hawthorne paced the length of his study. The room, lined with shelves groaning under the weight of anatomical charts and leather-bound journals, had become his sanctum, a fortress against the moral tempests brewing beyond its walls. His ledger lay open on the oak desk, its pages now a dense tapestry of notations, pairings cross-referenced by physical attributes, projected yields, and emergent patterns in the children born of his design. What he once dismissed as a stupid indulgence had crystallized into conviction. This was no mere experiment, but the genesis of a systematic archive, a database charting the invisible threads of heredity that he alone could weave into strength. Yet as the fire crackled in the hearth, casting erratic shadows, Hawthorne paused, his pen hovering. A faint unease stirred, not from doubt, but from the growing chorus of whispers that even his influence couldn't fully silence. In the quarters, where the chill seeped through chinked logs, the weight of Hawthorne's program pressed heavier than winter's bite. Mira, her body still bearing the echoes of childbirth, toiled in the weaving shed, her fingers deftly threading looms that churned out linens for distant markets. Elias Jr., now a toddler with eyes that mirrored his father's quiet intensity, played at her feet, oblivious to the engineered legacy etched into his veins. Josiah's visits were fleeting, stolen under the guise of repairs, each one laced with the ache of what their bond had become, a sanctioned act, stripped of tenderness by the doctor's decree. "We hold what we can," Mira whispered during one such moment, her hand brushing his calloused one, a spark of defiance amid the mandated routine. But the fire in Josiah's gaze had dimmed, tempered by the knowledge that resistance could shatter their fragile world. Harlan, the grieving father from the previous autumn, had vanished months ago, officially a runaway, but the quarters knew better. His daughters, now assigned to domestic tasks, moved through the big house like ghosts, their laughter silenced by the fear of further division. Hawthorne's refinements grew bolder that spring, as thaws softened the ground and the fields beckoned with promise. He expanded the program beyond the quarters, incorporating observations from the healer's logs, fevers, births, even the subtle frailties that his pairings aimed to eradicate. A new arrival, a woman named Celine from a Virginia estate, caught his eye for her unyielding posture and clear complexion, traits he deemed ideal for diluting impurities. She was paired with a field hand called Theo, whose endurance under the plough had been meticulously noted. The union unfolded in the isolation of a remote cabin, overseen not by Hawthorne himself, but by a trusted overseer who reported back with clinical brevity. Celine's resistance was fierce, yet veiled. She sang low hymns of ancestral rivers during the nights that followed, her voice a thread of continuity against the erasure. Theo, broad-shouldered and solemn, bore the burden in silence, his thoughts turning to the chains that bound not just body, but future generations. Lydia Hawthorne, ever the silent architect, found her role evolving into something more tangible. Boredom in the mansion's gilded cage had given way to a morbid fascination. She began sketching family trees in her diary, branching out from the enslaved lines to her own. "If we refine the roots, the tree endures," she wrote one afternoon, quill scratching furiously as rain pattered against the panes. Her suggestions influenced Elias's selections, favoring those with docile temperaments to counter what she perceived as volatile strains. Yet isolation gnawed at her. Childless since their loss, she watched the program's offspring from afar, a mix of envy and revulsion stirring in her breast. At a rare supper with neighboring elites, she deflected inquiries about Blackthorn's exceptional yields with practiced grace, her laughter a brittle shield. "Modern methods," she demurred, while inside the diary's pages accumulated confessions of doubt, hidden away like contraband. The first overt crack in the program's facade appeared in the summer haze of 1848, when a child from an earlier pairing fell ill, not with the usual plantation fevers, but with a wasting sickness that baffled the local healers. Hawthorne isolated the boy in a shed behind the barn, his ledger entry terse. "Hereditary anomaly observed. Isolate for study." Whispers spread like wildfire through the quarters. Granny Ruth gathered the young ones under the stars, her voice a gravelly murmur. "The doctors write in our stories in his book, but the Lord keeps the real ones in the wind," she said, her tales weaving resilience into the fabric of their endurance. Josiah, overhearing, felt a spark reignite. He confided in a small circle by the forge, Harlan's daughters among them, planting seeds of subtle sabotage, delayed reports, feigned weaknesses in the fields. It was no rebellion, not yet, but a quiet insistence on agency, coded in the rhythms of labor songs that carried farther than overseers could hear. Official silence enveloped it all, a complicit veil woven by Hawthorne's kin in the county offices. Birth records in the courthouse listed only names and dates, sanitized of context. Deaths were attributed to natural causes, the anomalies buried in footnotes or omitted entirely. A traveling journalist, drawn by rumors of Blackthorn's prosperity, probed too deeply during a visit, inquiring about the unusual vitality of the workforce. Hawthorne entertained him with brandy and anecdotes of soil enrichment, but the next day the sheriff paid a call, ensuring the story never saw print. Elites across the South traded letters in coded phrases, improvement protocols, their pact a bulwark against scrutiny. Yet memory endured in fragments, a locket passed from Mira to her son, engraved with a river's curve, oral chains linking Celine's hymns to future generations. Back in 2023, Elena Ramirez delved deeper into the archives, her laptop screen illuminating stacks of crumbling documents. Cross-referencing the ledger with plantation inventories revealed the anomalies Hawthorne tracked. early hints of disorders that his program inadvertently catalogued, a twisted precursor to modern genetics. One entry detailed the boy's illness, symptoms of what today might be called a recessive trait, amplified by forced unions. Descendants' names surfaced in later censuses, scattered across Georgia and beyond, their lives shadowed by unexplained health echoes. Elena's pulse quickened. This wasn't just cruelty, but a foundational database of human variation, born from suffering and preserved in silence. As she photographed the pages, the weight of revelation settled. Truths long interred, now exhumed to confront the present. The program's persistence into 1849 hinted at fractures ahead, Hawthorne's ambitions clashing with the human spirit's unyielding core. In the quarters, alliances formed in whispers, while Lydia's diary grew thicker with unspoken regrets. Blackthorn Fields bloomed on, but beneath the cotton sway, the seeds of reckoning stirred, waiting for soil fertile enough to break free. Now I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're hearing this story. I want to know how far these silenced reports reach. The humid veil of late spring 1849 settled over Blackthorn Fields, turning the air thick with the scent of blooming jasmine and damp earth. Dr. Elias Hawthorne stood at the edge of the cotton rows, his silhouette sharp against the horizon, watching as workers bent low under the weight of their burdens. His ledger, now a tome of over 50 entries, rested in his coat pocket like a talisman, its pages filled with the meticulous charting of bloodlines he had reshaped. What started as a personal crusade against frailty had ballooned into a comprehensive record, one that tracked not just pairings, but the subtle deviations in the offspring, anomalies he attributed to unrefined elements, yet catalogued with obsessive detail. In his mind, this was progress incarnate, a database that could one day instruct the nation on fortifying its labor force. But as the sun climbed, casting long shadows across the fields, Hawthorne felt the first true stirrings of resistance, faint as a breeze through the boles. In the heart of the quarters, where cabins huddled like forgotten sentinels, Mira gathered with a small circle of women under the cover of twilight. Her son, Elias Jr., now 3 and wiry with promise, clung to her skirts, his small face a mirror of the quiet strength she had passed on, despite the program's intrusion. The pairings had woven a web of fractured kinships. Etta, once a singer of rivers, now carried a child from her forced match with Reuben, her eyes distant as she rocked by the fire. Celine, the newcomer whose hymns had become a nightly ritual, joined them, her voice low as she shared fragments of stories from her Virginia roots, tales of ancestors who slipped chains under moonlit skies. "We ain't just what he writes," Celine murmured, her fingers tracing patterns in the dirt, symbols of unbroken lines. Mira nodded, her own heart heavy with the memory of Josiah's touch, now rationed by oversight. The women spoke in coded rhythms, their words blending with the cricket's chorus, planting the seeds of collective memory that Hawthorne's ink could never fully erase. Josiah's forge had become a nexus of subtle defiance. The blacksmith, his arms corded from years of shaping iron to the plantation's will, now tempered his strikes with purpose. Harlan's daughters, the twins reassigned to the big house, slipped messages during their rare returns, notes on the doctor's latest selections overheard in the kitchen's hush. One evening, as embers glowed, Josiah confided in Theo, the man paired with Celine. "These pairings, they take our choices, but not our fire," he said, his voice a rumble like distant thunder. Theo, whose endurance masked a growing resolve, agreed, his broad frame leaning against the anvil. They spoke of diversions, a loosened gate here, a delayed harvest there, small acts that chipped at the program's efficiency without drawing the lash. Granny Ruth, ancient and unbowed, presided over these gatherings from her porch, her oral legacy a lifeline. "The doctor's book holds numbers," she would intone, her eyes sharp in the firelight. But our stories hold the soul. Pass 'em down, child. Let 'em outlive the fields. Up in the mansion, Lydia Hawthorne's world contracted further into isolation. The diary in the attic, its pages now a labyrinth of sketches and regrets, captured her unraveling. She had once seen the program as a noble extension of stewardship, a way to secure Blackthorn's legacy after their shared loss. But as she wandered the empty nursery, dust motes dancing in the slanted light, doubts crept in like ivy through cracked stone. The cries from the fields at night, muffled echoes of mandated unions, blended with her own unspoken grief, turning sleep into a battlefield. At supper, Elias spoke animatedly of his latest refinements, cross-referencing traits to predict superior yields. But Lydia's responses grew terse, her needlework abandoned mid-stitch. She confided fragments in her entries. What if his science sows weeds instead of wheat? Yet complicity bound her. Suggestions she had offered lingered in the ledger, pairings she had endorsed now bearing fruit in the quarters. A visit from a Charleston cousin brought fleeting distraction, teas laced with gossip of southern decline. But even then, her thoughts drifted to the shadows beyond the windows, where human lives twisted under her husband's design. Hawthorne's ambitions pushed boundaries that summer, incorporating rudimentary tests into his regimen. He assembled groups in the barn for what he called assessments, measuring responses to labor strains or minor exposures to tonics, all in pursuit of data to refine his database. One such trial involved a young man from an early pairing, tested for resilience against the heat. The outcome, a collapse logged as variable tolerance, sent ripples through the quarters. Whispers evolved into plans. Josiah and his circle timing shifts to shield the vulnerable, their actions veiled in the guise of communal aid. A minor incident unfolded when an overseer discovered a hidden cache of herbal remedies meant to ease the burdens of pregnancy in the program's wake. The culprit, never named, faced public admonishment, his form bent under the weight of implied correction. Yet the event galvanized the group, Granny Ruth's tales gaining urgency as she recounted legends of uprisings in distant lands, fueling a faith that endurance could outlast oppression. The elite's pact held firm, a silent bulwark against intrusion. Letters exchanged with planters in Alabama and South Carolina brimmed with veiled praise for Hawthorne's innovations, their shared silence a currency more valuable than cotton. The county clerk, a distant relative, ensured that ledgers reaching the courthouse omitted the program's essence. Births listed as natural, anomalies dismissed as seasonal ills. A freedman in town, privy to rumors from escaped kin, attempted to alert a northern abolitionist pamphlet, but the missive vanished en route, courtesy of the sheriff's watchful eye. Blackthorn's prosperity masked the rot. Yields soared, drawing envious glances from neighbors, while the true cost festered unseen. In the modern hush of the 2023 archives, Elena Ramirez pushed deeper, her notes sprawling across the table like veins of revelation. The ledger's entries from 1849 revealed Hawthorne's growing catalogue of disorders, subtle markers of traits amplified by his interventions, an unintended archive of genetic echoes that prefigured scientific databases born of ethics, not exploitation. Cross-checks with medical histories from descendant lines uncovered patterns, families in Georgia, towns plagued by unexplained frailties, whispers of old plantation blood in oral accounts. One faded letter slipped between pages was from Lydia to a sister, hinting at the weight of what we've wrought, its tone laced with the melancholy of belated insight. Elena's research connected dots to contemporary genealogists, descendants piecing together shattered trees, their persistence a testament to memory's quiet rebellion. As autumn winds stripped the fields bare in 1849, Hawthorne sensed the undercurrents but attributed them to natural variances, redoubling his efforts. Pairings continued, each one a thread in his grand design. But the quarter's resilience grew, oral chains linking past to future. Lydia's diary thickened with shadows, while Josiah's fire smouldered, awaiting the spark. Blackthorn Fields endured, its secrets buried deep, yet the human spirit, uncharted in any ledger, began to etch its own narrative, one of quiet persistence against the tide of forgetting. The Doctor's stupid program, meant to control, had instead sown the seeds of its own unraveling, truths waiting in the soil for hands brave enough to dig. The autumn gales of 1849 whipped through Blackthorn Fields, stripping leaves from the oaks that bordered the plantation like weary sentinels. Dr. Elias Hawthorne retreated deeper into his study as the winds howled, the room's walls closing in with the weight of his expanding ledger. Now a volume thick enough to anchor a ship's log, it chronicled not just pairings, but emergent patterns. Subtle shifts in the offspring that he interpreted as steps toward perfection, though anomalies persisted like stubborn weeds. A child from Etta and Reuben's union had shown early signs of frailty, a degenerative echo in his terse notation, prompting Hawthorne to isolate the family for closer observation. He paced the Persian rug, murmuring to himself about refining selections, his gaunt frame casting elongated shadows in the lamplight. The program, once a private folly he had called stupid, now felt like destiny, a database that could redefine inheritance for the South's elite. Yet doubt flickered at the edges, fueled by reports of inefficiencies in the fields, delays he blamed on weather, not the quiet sabotage blooming among the enslaved. In the quarters, where frost etched patterns on the cabin windows, Mira's circle tightened into a web of shared resolve. The women met in the weaving shed after dusk, their hands busy with looms to mask their whispers. Elias Jr., growing tall and watchful, mimicked the patterns they traced in the dust, symbols of rivers and unbroken chains, lessons in endurance passed from Granny Ruth's lips. Celine's hymns had evolved, laced with calls to hidden strength, her voice drawing Theo and Josiah into the fold during stolen hours. "The Doctor's pairings bind us like rope," Josiah said one night, his forge hammer set aside, the embers illuminating faces etched with weariness. Theo nodded, recounting how his own kin back in Virginia had smuggled messages north, faint hopes of aid that now seemed distant as stars. The twins, Harlan's daughters, brought fragments from the big house, overheard plans for a new round of assessments where Hawthorne intended to test endurance under simulated strains. Their eyes, once bright with youth, held a steely calm. The program's fractures had forged them into quiet sentinels, relaying warnings that could avert the next mandated union. Granny Ruth's tales anchored them all, spun by the central fire on evenings when the overseers patrolled less vigilantly. She spoke of ancestors who navigated the underground paths to freedom, their escapes coded in songs that the group now adapted, verses about rivers running contrary to the master's map. One such night, as wind rattled the shutters, she revealed a hidden cache, a bundle of cloth-wrapped herbs, remedies to ease the burdens of forced pregnancies smuggled from a sympathetic healer's kin. "This ain't rebellion," she cautioned, her voice gravel over silk, "but remembrance. We carry the weight so our blood don't forget." Mira clutched a small pouch, her thoughts on the child she might bear again under Hawthorne's decree, a fire kindling in her chest. The group's actions remained subtle, feigned illnesses to disrupt assessments, misplaced tools that slowed the overseer's rounds, but each act chipped at the program's iron grip, weaving agency into the fabric of survival. Lydia Hawthorne, isolated in the mansion's upper chambers, felt the estate's tensions seep through the walls like damp rot. Her diary, secreted in the attic amid trunks of faded silks, swelled with entries that blurred confession and rationalization. She had wandered the nursery that morning, trailing fingers over dust-shrouded cribs, the echo of her lost son mingling with imagined cries from the fields. Elias's latest enthusiasm, a proposal to document intergenerational variances through family clusters, struck her as hubris, yet she offered no protest, her suggestions now withheld in silent withdrawal. At luncheon, served on silver amid the parlour's heavy drapes, she probed him gently. "The yields are strong, but what of the spirit? Does your ledger account for that?" Hawthorne waved it off with a chuckle, citing European treatises on heredity, but his eyes lingered on her, sensing the rift. Lydia retreated to the widow's walk that evening, gazing at the quarter's faint lights, where shadows moved like conspirators. Regret coiled in her gut. The program she had once shaped now isolated her further, a complicit ghost in her own home. A letter from her Charleston cousin arrived, filled with news of mounting northern agitation, but she burned it unread, fearing its truths might shatter her fragile equilibrium. Hawthorne's assessments commenced under a pallid October sky, the barn transformed into a makeshift clinic of crates and lanterns. Groups were herded in at dawn, subjected to measured labours, hauling weighted sacks or enduring measured exposures to chill, while he noted responses with clinical detachment. One participant, a young man from Mira's circle, faltered under the strain, his collapse attributed to inherent weakness in the ledger. Whispers erupted afterward. Josiah's group attributed it to a dosed herbal mix, a calculated risk to expose the test's cruelty without direct confrontation. The overseer, sensing unrest, tightened patrols, but the incident rippled outward, drawing even the healer's reluctant aid, subtle alterations to reports that masked true conditions. In the big house kitchen, the twins overheard Lydia's murmured doubts during a tray service, her voice cracking as she spoke to a maid of necessary sacrifices gone awry. The girl, kin to Celine, carried the words back, a spark that humanized the mistress in their eyes, complicating the lines of enmity. The elite's complicity frayed at the edges, though the pact held. A neighboring planter, visiting to discuss shared protocols, departed uneasy after glimpsing the barn's proceedings. His letter to Hawthorne, later laced with caution, "Innovation borders peril in these times." The sheriff, summoned by rumors of unrest, arrived with deputies, interrogating field hands under threat of dispersal. None spoke overtly, their silences a shield forged in generations of caution. But Granny Ruth's oral chains ensured the event lived on, in tales of unbowed spirits that outlasted inquiries. Official records, filed in the county seat, sanitized the visit as routine maintenance, births and anomalies folded into bland tallies. Yet a freed woman in town, piecing rumors from market gossip, penned an anonymous note to a distant advocate, its path uncertain, but planted like a seed in fertile doubt. In the sterile fluorescence of the 2023 county archives, Elena Ramirez uncovered a parallel fracture, a sheaf of court filings from 1850 buried under property disputes, hinting at early challenges to Blackthorn's operations, claims of irregular practices dismissed by Hawthorne-aligned judges. The ledger's 1849 entries detailed the assessment's data, anomalies clustering in ways that foreshadowed inherited burdens, a database unwittingly mapping disorders born of coercion. Descendant interviews, gleaned from oral history projects, echoed the quarter's resilience. Families in Atlanta suburbs recounting old field songs that preserved the truth, their persistence a quiet justice against forgetting. One interviewee, a great-granddaughter of Etta, described unexplained health patterns in her line, tying back to the program's shadows. Elena's notes connected these threads, revealing how Hawthorne's stupid archive had seeded a legacy of both suffering and survival, truths exhumed to demand belated reckoning. As winter loomed in 1849, Hawthorne redoubled his cataloguing, pairings resuming amid the chill, but the quarter's undercurrent swelled. Alliances strengthening, memories deepening. Lydia's isolation mirrored the estate's. Her diary a vault of emerging conscience. Josiah's fire, fanned by collective whispers, awaited ignition, while Mira's symbols in the dirt promised continuity. Blackthorn Fields slumbered under frost, its secrets coiling tighter, the human will etching lines no ledger could contain. The program's design, meant to dominate, instead illuminated the unquenchable spark of those it sought to define, truths stirring beneath the surface, poised for breakthrough. The winter of 1850 descended on Blackthorn Fields with a ferocity that mirrored the gathering storm within its borders. Snow, blanketing the fields in a deceptive hush that buried the cotton stubble like forgotten graves. Dr. Elias Hawthorne, undeterred by the cold, expanded his assessments into the heart of the season, converting an outbuilding into a stark chamber for endurance trials. Lanterns flickered against walls scarred by previous labors, casting the faces of the assembled in pallid relief. His ledger, now a repository of nearly 100 entries, brimmed with data on variances, subtle markers of strength and frailty that he dissected like a naturalist pinning specimens. These anomalies are the keys, he confided to his reflection in the frost-laced window, convinced his program had birthed not just laborers, but a foundational archive of human potential, one that could illuminate the hidden flaws in bloodlines across the South. Yet, as he directed a group through measured exposures to the chill, noting tremors and recoveries, the air thickened with an undercurrent he could no longer dismiss as mere weather's whim. In the quarters, where hearths sputtered against the invading frost, Mira's circle had solidified into a clandestine network, their meetings veiled in the steam of shared pots over meager fires. Elias Jr., bundled in threadbare quilts, absorbed the lessons woven into Granny Ruth's tales, stories of spirits that traversed frozen waters, unbroken by chains or designs. The women, joined now by more kin from recent pairings, passed pouches of herbs under cloaks, remedies to fortify against the assessment's toll. Celine's hymns, once solitary, swelled into choruses that echoed faintly to the forge, where Josiah and Theo hammered out plans in the rhythm of iron on anvil. The doctor's tests take our breath, but we give it back in whispers, Josiah murmured during one gathering, his eyes scanning the shadows for patrols. The twins, Harlan's daughters, had become vital links, smuggling scraps of linen etched with warnings, dates of impending selections, overheard in the big house's corridors. Their movements through the mansion, once timid, now carried a quiet authority, the program's fractures honing them into bearers of hidden knowledge. Granny Ruth, her frame shrunken but her voice unyielding, presided over these winter vigils with the gravity of an elder oracle. Gathered around her, the group listened as she recounted oral fragments from elders long gone. Accounts of similar meddlings on distant estates, where forced unions had sparked silent pacts of remembrance. "He catalogues our blood like seeds in a jar," she said, her gnarled hands gesturing to the ledger's imagined weight. "But our memories are the roots that crack the glass." One night, as a blizzard howled, she unveiled a relic, a small, carved wooden token from an ancestor who had evaded such programs by fleeing north, its grooves mapping a path of stars. Mira clutched it, her thoughts drifting to Josiah's distant forge, where their son played amid the sparks. The token became a talisman, passed among them, symbolizing persistence against the erasure Hawthorne imposed. Subtle acts multiplied. Diluted tonics slipped into assessment rations, causing feigned collapses that forced delays. Tools misplaced to hinder the outbuilding's preparations. No open defiance, but a steady erosion, the human spirit asserting itself in the spaces between notations. Lydia Hawthorne, confined to the mansion's stifling warmth, felt the isolation deepen into a chasm. The parlour's fire roared, yet chill seeped from the draughts, mirroring the frost in her marriage. Her diary, hidden deeper in the attic amid cobwebbed beams, filled with frantic scrawls, sketches of the quarter's lights seen from her window, annotated with questions she dared not voice. Elias's zeal had soured for her. His talk of intergenerational mapping evoked not progress, but the spectre of their lost child, whose frailty now seemed a divine rebuke. During a rare evening repast, as snow lashed the panes, she confronted him softly. "Your database captures traits, Elias, but what of the hearts that bear them? The fields whisper of unrest." He paused, fork midway to his lips, his obsidian eyes narrowing. "Unrest is variance to be culled," he replied, but the words hung heavy, his dismissal laced with the first hint of defensiveness. Lydia withdrew to the nursery afterward, trailing fingers over empty cradles, tears blurring the dust. Complicity weighed like lead. Her early endorsements lingered in the ledger, pairings she had shaped now yielding children whose cries pierced her nights. A letter from her cousin, urging a visit to Charleston's milder climes, tempted her. But fear rooted her, fear of leaving the shadows she had helped cast. Hawthorne's trials intensified through February, the outbuilding a frozen arena where groups endured prolonged labors in the cold, their responses etched into his growing archive. One assessment targeted a cluster from Mira's line, including a youth from Etta's Union, whose faltering understrain was logged as a persistent debility. Whispers exploded in the aftermath. The group attributed it to their interventions, a laced herbal that amplified fatigue without harm. The overseer, furious, imposed collective penalties, reduced rations, extended shifts that tested the plantation's own endurance. Josiah's forge became a refuge, where men gathered to mend not just tools, but resolve. Theo shared a vision from his Virginia kin, networks of freedmen smuggling information south, faint threads of external aid. The incident drew unlikely allies. The healer, long coerced into silence, began altering logs subtly, masking anomalies as common ailments. In the big house, the twins overheard Lydia's solitary mutterings to a mirror, "What monsters have we made?" Carrying the echo back, humanizing her in the quarter's lore, a figure of conflicted complicity rather than unyielding foe. The elite's web strained under the season's pressures. Invitations to Blackthorn dwindled, whispers of overreach circulating among planters wary of abolitionist eyes turning south. The sheriff's visits grew frequent, his deputies roughing up field hands for clarifications, but silences met their queries, fortified by Granny Ruth's oral shields. Official annals in the county seat remained immaculate, assessments framed as health initiatives, unrest as winter malaise. A distant relative, a magistrate in Atlanta, quashed a vague petition from town gossips, his ruling buried in procedural fog. Yet fractures appeared. A coded letter from a Louisiana counterpart warned Hawthorne of northern pamphlets echoing unnatural breedings, urging caution. Memory persisted in the margins. A freedwoman's journal in a hidden cache, fragments of Blackthorn tales smuggled north. In the dim archives of 2023, Elena Ramirez traced these winter threads, her breath fogging the microfilm reader as she uncovered Hawthorne's 1850 notations, clusters of debilities that his program had amplified, an unwitting catalogue of disorders passed through generations. Oral histories from descendants painted vivid portraits, Mira's great-nieces in Savannah reciting hymns of resistance, their family trees riddled with health echoes tied to Blackthorn. One interview revealed a locket, kin to Granny Ruth's token, engraved with river symbols, a chain of remembrance unbroken. Elena's synthesis exposed the database's dual legacy, a tool of control that inadvertently mapped human resilience, truths emerging from silence to challenge historical voids. The stupid program's anomalies, once buried, now illuminated paths to justice, descendants' persistence unearthing what power had interred. As March thaws hinted at renewal in 1850, Hawthorne sensed the tide shifting, his ledger's pages turning heavier with unresolved variances. Pairings loomed anew, but the quarter's network pulsed with quiet fire, Lydia's doubts a mirror to the estate's unrest. Blackthorn Fields stirred from winter's grip, its soil concealing not just roots, but the burgeoning force of those who refused to be mere entries, humanity's indelible script, poised to rewrite the narrative. If this story has already gripped you, leave a like. This helps Mira's story reach more people. The spring of 1850 unfurled over Blackthorn Fields with a tentative mercy, wildflowers piercing the thawing soil like hesitant confessions. Dr. Elias Hawthorne, his once unyielding frame now stooped by relentless winters and unspoken frictions, poured over his ledger in the study's dim confines. The volume, swollen to bursting, mapped a labyrinth of bloodlines, pairings that had yielded robust laborers alongside insidious anomalies, traits that defied his calculations and mocked his vision of purity. He had dismissed the program's origins as a stupid whim, but now it loomed as his life's opus, a database chronicling the hidden mechanics of inheritance, from vigor to the subtle frailties that clustered in certain lines. As he selected the next cluster for assessment, his pen faltered. Reports from overseers hinted at sabotage, tools vanishing, labors slackening, not mere variances, but deliberate shadows cast by those he sought to refine. Hawthorne straightened, his obsidian eyes narrowing toward the window, where the quarter's smoke curled like veiled warnings. The air carried a charge, as if the land itself conspired against his design. In the heart of the quarters, Mira's network had woven into an unbreakable tapestry, their gatherings now a ritual under the budding canopy of oaks. Elias Jr., 4 summers old and sharp-eyed, traced the river symbols in the dirt with a stick, his small voice reciting Granny Ruth's fragments, tales of ancestors who bent but never broke under masters' schemes. The women, their hands calloused from fields and looms, shared pouches of fortified herbs, elixirs to counter the assessment's drain. Celine's hymns rose fuller, drawing the men from the forge. Josiah, Theo, and a growing circle of kin, their faces etched with the quiet ferocity of endurance. "His book chains our bodies," Josiah whispered during one dawn assembly, the mist cloaking their forms. "But our words free the souls." The twins, Harlan's daughters, had evolved into swift messengers, their domestic duties a cover for relaying Lydia's fractured murmurs, hints of her withdrawing support, a crack in the mansion's facade. Granny Ruth, frail yet radiant, passed the carved token hand to hand, its grooves a map of persistence. "The doctor's ink fades with time," she intoned, her voice threading through the birdsong, "but our memories carve stone." Their acts escalated subtly, assessments disrupted by feigned collapses, ledgers glimpsed and subtly altered by the healer's aid, a collective breath held against the program's inexorable pull. Lydia Hawthorne, adrift in the mansion's echoing halls, confronted the unraveling with a hollow ache. The attic diary, its pages a storm of ink and doubt, chronicled her descent from architect to witness. She had paced the widow's walk at midnight, the quarter's faint glows mocking her isolation, the cries from mandated unions blending with her own buried grief. Elias's fervor had become a mirror to her regrets. His database, once a shared dream of legacy, now exposed the abyss of their complicity. During a tense supper, as spring rains drummed the roof, she shattered the silence. "Elias, your pairings have birthed more than strength. They've sown discord in the blood, anomalies that echo our sins." He recoiled, his face paling, the ledger slamming shut like a judgment. "Variance is to be mastered," he retorted, but his voice cracked. the first admission of the program's toll. Lydia fled to the nursery, collapsing amid the dust, tears carving paths through the grime. Her endorsements lingered like ghosts, pairings she had refined, now fracturing families she could no longer ignore. In a final act of fracture, she slipped a note to one of the twins during a kitchen errand. "Seek the hidden drawer in my study. Truths for the light." It was no redemption, but a thread of conscience, unraveling the elite's pact from within. Hawthorne's final assessments that April unfolded amid rising tempests, the outbuilding a cauldron of tension. Groups from Mira's line faced the trials, prolonged strains under the warming sun, their responses noted with desperate precision. But the network struck true. A coordinated lapse, herbs amplifying fatigue, caused a cascade of collapses that halted the proceedings. Overseers bellowed, lashes threatened, but the quarters stood unbowed. Their silences a wall no coercion could breach. Josiah led a hushed evacuation of the vulnerable, spirits lifted by the healer's diversions. Hawthorne, witnessing from the barn's edge, felt the illusions shatter. His database, meant to conquer heredity, had instead amplified the human will's uncharted force. In rage, he ordered dispersals, families sundered further, but the damage seeped irreversible. Whispers reached the county seat, the sheriff's grip loosening under mounting rumors. Elites distanced themselves, letters turning cold, their complicity exposed as the fragile veil it was. Lydia's note, discovered by Mira's circle, revealed sketches of the ledger's key, a cipher to its depths, smuggled out under nightfall, the first breach in the archive's sanctity. By summer's blaze, the program crumbled under its own weight. Hawthorne, isolated and ailing, retreated to his study, the ledger gathering dust as overseers defected to quieter estates. The quarters breathed freer, songs reclaiming the fields, Granny Ruth's oral chains binding generations in resilience. Lydia vanished to Charleston, her diary left behind, a confession interred in the attic. Blackthorn Fields yielded one last harvest, then faded into decay, its secrets sinking into the soil like rain-soaked roots. Official records erased the anomalies, deaths as fevers, births as routine, but memory endured in the blood. Disorders whispering through descendant lines, a twisted legacy of the doctor's folly. In the hush of 2023, Elena Ramirez emerged from the archives transformed, the ledger digitized and shared with historians and genealogists. Cross-references unveiled the full scope. Hawthorne's stupid database, the first crude catalogue of genetic disorders. Born from coercion, yet illuminating inherited burdens that plagued families for generations. Descendants, from Georgia's rural hollows to urban enclaves, came forward, oral histories aligning with the pages, health patterns like Mira's resilience twisted into frailties. Josiah's fire dimmed in unexplained silences. Elena's publication sparked quiet reckonings, lawsuits against forgotten estates, memorials etched in Blackthorn's ruins, justice tardia emerging from the grave of forgetting. Betrayal's web, elites' pacts, institutional veils crumbled under scrutiny while persistence shone. Granny Ruth's tales alive in community gatherings, faith in truth's slow bloom. The soil of Blackthorn, once a laboratory of shadows, now cradles echoes of the silenced, families destroyed, yet reborn in revelation. Memory, that stubborn river, outruns erasure, washing ashore the truths elites buried deep. In this unveiling, we honor the endurance of Mira, Josiah, and countless others. Their spirits demanding we remember, humanity defies even the darkest designs. The Doctor's archive, meant to control, instead testifies to the unquenchable human core, a beacon against the night of complicity. Subscribe to the channel for more forbidden and forgotten stories. Thank you for following the case of Blackthorn Fields. See you in the next video.